G'day and kia ora. Aotea here. Welcome to part 3 of my aircraft skinning for War Thunder tutorial series. This time around, panel lines and rivets. In part 1, we set up all of the folders and found images to skin from. Part 2 was about finding all of the separate panels and creating a base colour map and a normal map. This time around we'll look at why layer order is important, creating panel lines, why you should enclose your panels when you can, creating lines of equally spaced rivets, finding and installing new brushes, and creating unique screws. Okay, so here's where we left off. We've got a C map that looks like this, and an N map that looks like that. They're combined by the program using the BLK to make this model in the game. Let's go back to the C map. The things I'm creating today will be used on all future skins for this model, regardless of what camo I'm painting. They'll be visible in all of the skins that I make. So I'll be making them on a layer that sits higher up the layer stack than the painted colour and roundels and serials. Remember that the layers work like a stack of transparent glass panels. Your eyeball is at the top looking down. Stuff higher up in the stack will appear in front of layers lower down on the stack. Go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to use one that's in the 4K skinning template that I imported in part 2. Here's mine. It's called Panel Lines, and it lives in a folder called Details. Notice how it's above the roundels and the serials layer? That means it will appear in front of those things. You'll notice mine already has a colour overlay effect added to it. Go ahead and add one to yours if you haven't already done it. Red works really well in this case. Now I'm going to turn off that black layer that we created last time so that I can see the background image with all the panel lines on it. I'm going to select the brush tool. I want a round, sharp paintbrush with a 1 pixel size. There's lots of ways of doing that. I usually just right click somewhere in the image. That brings up this brush selector box. Set 1 pixel width and 100% hardness. Let's make sure that we're using black too as a foreground colour. Just click on this little box here. In part 8 of this series, I'll be looking at weathering. When I do that, I'll need to be able to call up individual panels from the skin. To do that properly, I need to fully enclose all of my panels. That's fine for places like here, where you can see that all of the lines join up, they touch. But what about over here? The lines are just floating in space. I need some way of surrounding them. Here's the cheats way of doing it. I'm going to go down to one of the layers I made when I was finding all of the parts. I'm going to pick the tail port side in this case. Control click on the thumbnail to select the shape of that layer, but not the layer itself. Making sure that I'm on the panel lines layer, I'll flood fill with black. Remember, that's the Alt plus backspace shortcut. Because that layer has the red colour overlay on it, it'll come out red now. Now I'm going to go up to Select, Modify, Contract. I'm going to set the Contract By value to 2 pixels. Hit OK. Now press the Delete key. And there you go. I've got the edge of the tail nicely defined for us. Hit Ctrl D to deselect, and let's add our panel lines now. Click where you want to start, say here, and go to the end of a straight section. Hold down your Shift key and click. Keep doing that until you've got the whole thing done. As I do all the rest of the panels, some of you may wonder why I just don't do the whole black layer in one hit. That's because where 2 panels overlap, it cancels out the shared border, and I have to draw it in manually later. So this way is actually easier. And besides, it means I break a pretty boring job down into easy to do chunks. Okay, so here's the plane now with all of the panel lines drawn in. Don't worry about the fact that they're red, that just makes them stand out better against the black background. When we come to use them, I'll remove the colour overlay anyway. Now the next step is the rivets. Before we begin, can I say that I find a lot of skinners who are new to the game overdo the whole rivet thing. They make the rivets so big and prominent that the plane looks like it was assembled by peasants out of used parts at the Chelyabinsk tractor factory. A light hand and a gentle touch goes a long way here. Don't overdo it. I'm going to use the same technique I used to make the panel lines, a new layer called Rivets. Here's mine, and this time the colour overlay is green with a black stroke. Turn off the black layer. You can turn off the panel lines too if it makes it easier. I'm changing the brush size to 4. Now you can go through and carefully try to click everywhere where you want to rivet. But what about over here? Look at all the rivets. Or even worse, what about here? These dark lines are all rivet lines, but only the ones with missing paint have been drawn in the background skin. How are you going to place those accurately? Draw each one in turn and move it into position? That's the way I did it for years, until another skinner told me a much easier way. Firstly, you're going to need the brush control panel open. If it isn't already on your toolbars, grab it from the window menu. Right down the bottom is a setting called spacing. I'm going to set that to 310. Now that number won't work on every skin or even on every part of this one, but I've tested it out and it does work right here. You may need to change that figure to get the right spacing for the skin you're working on. Click on the first rivet in the line. Now shift click on the last rivet in a line. Isn't that so much easier? Okay, so here's my plan again, but this time with all of the panel lines and all of the rivets visible on the black skin. Okay, lastly we'll look at adding some screws. Some are the simple slot type, others are Phillips head. You can find brushes already made for you by just doing a Google search. There's a link in the description to a nice set of screw heads. Download it, unzip it, and place the ABR file into the folder where your brushes live. For me, it was C, Program Files, Adobe, Photoshop, Presets, Brushes. Now that path may vary depending on your setup. You'll need to close Photoshop and reopen it. That's when the program loads all of the available brushes. Now when you go to brushes, you can add a set of screw heads. With the brush tool selected, right-click somewhere in the image. Up in the top right corner, click on the little cogwheel. And from the list now, I'm going to select screw heads. Now it's going to ask me if I want to replace my current brushes with this new set, or if I want to append, that is, to add to the end of the existing brush set. I'm going to append. Now if I scroll down, you'll see the new screw head brushes ready for me to use. I'll pick the Phillips head one, and let's do a line of them. Okay, that's nice. Except for one thing, they all look exactly the same. Wouldn't it be great if they were all tightened up to slightly different directions? So let's look back up at the brush control panel. See that top checkbox marked Shape Dynamics? Click on it. Now drag the slider control for Angle Jitter to the far right end. Angle Jitter is just the Photoshop way of saying random rotation. To really randomize it, check the Flip X and the Flip Y jitter as well. Let's try it again now. Nice. Okay, that's where we leave part 3. Next time we'll be adding the colours to make the camo pattern. See you then. Kia kaha.